One way to get a jump start on planting is by using above ground methods. We'll show you a couple examples of how Northland gardeners are making that work for them. And live expert advice for all your growing concerns straight ahead on this edition of Great Gardening.
It really is a special environment.
I love the organization of the petals.
It's a campanula conglomerata.
Hummingbirds will go there, the bees are all over the place. Urban gardening is a wonderful thing.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Pamela Fish. We are here with our resident experts, professional gardener and landscaper Tom Casper and horticulturist and educator Bob Olin. Well, it's almost mid-April, but feels like it's going to be a while before that soil warms up.
What do you think, Tom?
It sure does.
Actually, tonight with the sun out, spring was in the air, and it won't be long. 1 week from now, we'll have a different kind of discussion, I guarantee it. Well, maybe.
And we're really not
guarantee
that,
from Bob.
Yeah. And we're really not that far behind. I mean, the temperatures are cool and we've got snow, but it will go fast as the days start to warm up. So we'll be in for a good spring and good summer still. So.
You know, we've had cold periods like this in the past, and we want to advise people kind of stay to your regular planting schedule. And May 1 will be the first big break where we're going to be getting things like onions in the ground and woody ornamentals, trees and shrubs. I would stay to that schedule because I think we're going to have a spring.
And there are ways to get things planted a little earlier. We'll hear about some success with straw bales coming up. But we want to welcome also our phone volunteers from the St. Louis County Master Gardeners. They want to hear from you, so please call with questions about your landscape or your garden plans, or tell them about your memories of days of green grass and flowers. There are a couple numbers there to call. You can call locally 788-2844. There's a toll-free number there on the screen, or you can email askgardening@wdsc.org. Well, speaking of memories of spring, these are some signs of the season that we shot 1 year ago. So this isn't going on out there today, but it was April 13th, 2017. We were seeing this outside, some blooms. What are those blue and white ones? Those are beautiful.
All Scilla there.
Oh, that's right. And a little bit of onion coming up, and of course the rhubarb poking out of the ground. So won't be long before we start seeing that.
Yeah.
I might just point out that rhubarb just breaking out through the ground is the only time when I've observed deer actually attacking them. So you got to protect those a little bit when they're early. After that, they don't bother them.
Okay. Well, straw bale gardening has been around for a number of years and has really gained in popularity in the last few years. Let's take a look at some of the basics. If you're going to be doing gardening with straw bales, you want to use a tightly tied bale with the cut side up, and then make sure you put it where you want it to stay, because those are big things to move around, especially once they get watered. Need 6 hours of sun, and if you put it on the ground, you have to use a weed barrier, right, between the straw bale and the soil. And
you don't really have to.
You don't have
some
to.
People,
okay.
Well, some of the weeds might grow through it, but most, I mean, it's 2 feet of mass on top of your grass. So
it would take a lot for them to come up. Okay.
That barrier really is porous, so the water does drain through. It's not just clear black plastic. People
probably
a landscape fabric.
Yeah, fabric or maybe newspaper some people use.
Sure.
And then you want to condition with water and fertilizer for 10 to 12 days and let the heat from the bale cool before planting. They say that mushrooms might form in those straw bales as well.
Oh, they can, because that it's a moist environment and there's plenty of organic material there. Those are some good points, Pam. I think the critical thing, and if people have trouble with straw bales, they got to get them conditioned. You've just got straw, which is carbon, cellulose, so you got to get that fertility in there, give it enough time to work and begin the breakdown process. Otherwise, you won't be particularly successful.
Well, right now we want to see some success in that, and we head to a local homestead where their successes with straw bales has them going back for more.
Mike Stingle, and we live out in the city of Rice Lake, I guess it is now. We were at a graduation party. They had these around their deck, and I thought it was kind of cool. Once you treat these bales by water, and we use an organic fertilizer, they break down. So they, in a sense, are making a little compost pile. The heat of that, I guess, is really what gives you the advantage of starting early. So the bales are significantly, loose now. Because we have such a short growing season in this neck of the woods, you can actually plant earlier, and you can actually create like plastic vessels over the bales early in the spring, earlier than you normally would, I think. So like your carrots, your beets, beans, they're all started from seed. So we start that with a little bit of topsoil on top, about 2 inches. So these are beets, and they do all right, enough to give us a couple meals. That's all we're really after. We do some canning of beans and whatnot, and tomatoes we like to make sauce. Overall, once the plant grows, there's no weeding at all. That's kind of neat, These bales here were last year's bales, so you can see that they're significantly broke down. I took a bunch of the rest of these bales, and I basically just piled them up. And I have not done anything to those. A little bit of fertilizer. I've got cucumbers and squash down there. There's some expense to the bale every year. Really, that's about it. For somebody that doesn't have a lot of yard space, or say somebody that had a deck situation or an apartment or whatever, you could do one of these or 2 of these, and you'd have you could grow vegetables right there. Basically, a couple of fence posts per row if you wanted to do it in a row version. I had some fencing wire, and then other than that, what I did was I ran soaker hose on each top of each bale. We just kind of watch, and I periodically will stick my hand in there just to kind of see how wet it is, and it's plenty wet. These are kind of twofold. In the fall, if you have frost, it helps support covering if you need to, and also early in the spring when you're starting and you want to create a greenhouse effect on your plants, you can drape plastic over and tuck them in.
All right, there are some pros and cons to planting with straw bales, and some of the things that people like about them, you have an instant garden, and you can put it wherever you get the sunshine. You can replace poor soil and poor drainage conditions, and then there's less digging and not much weeding.
Well, and another thing you could add to the pros is it's really relatively inexpensive compared to going out and buying containers and soil, things like that, to create raised gardens like that. So it's a good way if people are newly getting into gardening or wanting to try something experimental and see if it works.
Mike did such a nice job there, and he pointed things out. One thing that he kind of glanced over, those stakes at either end with a guy wire in between. If you are going to cover to extend the season, make sure you don't use a clear poly and fry everything on the inside if you don't get that off. So the spun polyesters, the remaize are the covering material. But it's one of the advantages. Tom, I really think, like last year, another huge advantage is the drainage. We had so much rain continuously, and if you have a low soil or if you have a heavy soil, that does provide an advantage.
But one of the things to watch out for is those bales can dry out quickly, and so they may need more water. And I think you said too, Bob, some more fertilization than you might have in the ground.
Fertility, and I like a mix of both synthetics, which releases quickly, and some organics, which will give you your trace nutrients. We introduced the concept about 4 years ago, and we followed up with people who were trying it. 50% of the people gave up the first year, about 10% were successful, and about 30% said it's intriguing enough, so we're going to try it again.
Sure.
So Mike was definitely one of the successful
Yeah,
people.
he's done it 3 or 4 years now.
Congratulations to him. Yeah.
All right. Well, moving on, we do have some questions already with us, and a couple of these came in via email. First one is from Steve, north of Cotton. It happens to be about rhubarb. And he says, if you could give me some advice on cutting up a rhubarb root. Now, is that something you want to do to maintain the growth year to year? Because he says his quit growing.
Oh, quit growing. Yeah, he wants to get it up. They really are tough, and he wants to do that. We saw the photo earlier, just when they were beginning to break bud. That would be ideal. He wants to lift them up and make sure you get 1 or 2 buds and just divide it with a spade. It's pretty easy, but he may find that there's some rot in there as they age. Sometimes rot can set in. You want to trim all of that off, but oftentimes moving to a sunnier and a better drained location, and then dividing that root up with at least 2 buds just below the surface, and then it's almost foolproof, almost done.
And really, as we're getting into spring here or into more spring-like conditions, that's the perfect time to do it. So his question is very timely as he plans for his gardening activities the next couple weeks. So.
All right. This is from Bruce, I believe. No, June in Tower. Bruce was on the email. June in Tower says, I didn't get my peonies divided last fall. Can I still divide them this spring?
Preferably not. She'll want to wait to do that in the fall. If she goes in and does them now, or this spring, they're going to be okay. They're going to grow and things, but more than likely she's going to damage buds, damage potential flowering. So if they were still flowering or had flowered in the past, it's best for her to wait till this coming fall, sometime between mid-August and mid-September.
All right.
You know, that's great advice, Tom. The spring of the year, so many people are moving, and they like to sometimes bring plant material with them. And some of the materials we normally would be planting in the fall, like peonies or iris, you can still move those. You might sacrifice some bloom the first year, but if you've negotiated with the current buyer, by all means, I wouldn't hesitate to bring them along.
Yeah.
Particularly if it's a $300 peony.
Yeah. Very good
those
advice.
can be expensive. All right. Jim from Duluth has a cherry tree. It's 30 years old, but each year sees fewer and fewer leaves, not too many blossoms, and no fruit anymore. What's going on there?
30 years old? Mm-hmm. You know, it is getting a little long into the tooth, so to speak. He wants to look for disease, I think would be the biggest issue. Take a look at the leaves and make sure that he's got good, lush green growth. If he's got a lot of spotted material, evidence of fungal disease, then to revitalize it, some renovative pruning would be a good idea, but he may have to go to some kind of a fungicide to get that tree in better health so that it...
Yeah, and look at some things around the base if there's any kinds of damage to the tree that it's sustained with rabbits or mice or things like that have really restricted its opportunity to grow, and kind of look at a few of those things as well as why it might be in this state of decline. So.
Sure. Here's a good one from Frankie in Duluth, falls in line with our topic. Frankie's wondering, can you use hay? If you're straw bale gardening, can you use straw or hay?
No, and there's a big difference. Hay is something you feed an animal. Straw is the shaft of a grain that the animal wants to lay on for bedding. And the big advantage of straw is you've got good drainage there. Hay will tend to mat and compact on you and destroy all of that good drainage. So he definitely wants to buy straw. It's more expensive, but it's really a component of straw bale gardening. That's why they call it straw bale instead of hay bale gardening.
Sorry.
Right?
Well, some things I read, you know, some of the research I did said you could use hay, but I know I've heard from you guys and others that you shouldn't.
And really, hay will contain just thousands and thousands of weed seeds
as well.
So they would be battling constantly weeds with that.
You know, straw does have this structure in it, so it's going to stay, rather than compact, it's going to stay firm and will provide room for those roots to work between it.
Absolutely. Another question about straw bales. How can I keep the squirrels and critters out of my straw bales when I'm using them to garden? And there's a follow-up question to that too.
Well, that's certainly a challenge for all of us that garden, is keeping those critters out of harvesting raspberries and tomatoes as they're just getting ripened. And some folks have some different containment systems, and I know folks that have used bone meal or blood meal and had some success with that as a deterrent and things. So.
Because this follow-up is how to keep the critters out of the strawberries even when I cover them with netting. That's a tough one
cover with netting.
sometimes too.
You know, these lovely little chipmunks that we all just really appreciate can create a real mess for you. I think good fencing, and you got to get the 1/4-inch mesh, what we call hardware cloth, and then you have to cover with a real dense, tough poly that is about 1/4 inch. I mean, they will get through anything that's about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, which most people fence with. But I still think, short of trapping, I think that fencing with a denser weave is what you're going to have to do.
Okay. All right, well, we'll get back to more questions later, but this week's tour takes us to a smallish Duluth yard where they produce an awful lot of food and have proved successful at starting the season a little early.
Hi, I'm Alex Staffen. This is my wife Barb. We live on St. Andrews Street in Hunters Park, and welcome to our garden. This is almost sun all day long, and I think pretty much everything here, well, including those tomatoes, came from our greenhouse.
We start all the tomatoes down the basement in the greenhouse.
And off to the side down below, there's some flowers as well as herbs that she grows. This is something here too that Barb tried this year. It's potatoes in a bag, and they're growing well. This area out here, there used to be cedar trees and then lots of nice perennials in front of it, and the deer just destroyed those, so we've done potatoes the last couple of years. We've got the rhubarb, and the deer seem to leave it alone. So have you heard of the song, The Lonely Little Petunia in the Onion Patch?
That's Nicotiana. It's called Only the Lonely. So it's just one. We store the squash down the basement. Acorn, spaghetti, and Hubbard, which is my favorite. And a lot of the produce, if there's excess, give it to the neighbors or family and friends. Mainly it's tomatoes that I can.
We tap the maple trees we have here and make maple syrup. Well, we get about right around 20 half pints. These trees weren't here when we moved in, and just by accident a few helicopter seeds happened to land in our yard, and we happened to look in the garden and there's a maple tree, and we put little fences around them, and you know, there they are 30 years later.
Al makes blackberry jelly. The blackberries are out in the back.
There's a lot of seeds in this particular blackberry, so as far as just eating them plain, they're not that good, but as far as for making jelly, they work really well. We originally put the fences around to keep the deer out, and then with the raspberries, the last couple of years, we've had squirrels get in there. So I put a top on it and then covered it in chicken wire. This is my Am I Smarter Than a Squirrel project, so we'll see what happens. It's really nice. It's just kind of a quiet green space, but also with all of the gardens and trees that we have, it's nice for a place to put leaves and cuttings. And this is the area back here where we compost. And when the kids were young, we'd come back here and have the fires and do the hot dogs and some more thing. And our neighbors across the street had several large pine trees come down in their yard. I carved it out and she turned it into a planter, and I think it looks really nice.
When we entertain, this is one of the favorite spots, so even if it's raining out.
Nice job gardening there, and it just amazes me when you go to a place and it looks like a small yard, and then back in the back they had so much space that they used so well, and you saw the potatoes in the bags and the tomatoes that they started early, so they got to jump on the season.
And mentioning they're growing flowering tobacco or Nicotiana, which is a great annual for folks to look at if they really want something striking in their yard with massive leaves and
big.
Tall stalks, and also wonderful for attracting hummingbirds when it blooms.
Okay.
And we want to thank Alec. That was a beautiful tour, lots of good points. He does, our previous question there where we saw problems with small critters, and we saw some of the chicken wire again. Oftentimes chicken wire won't keep mice out, won't keep chipmunks out, so you really have to go to a finer mesh than that for best protection.
All right. Well, he may have found that out by now. We'll see. Okay.
He's keeping the big gray squirrels out there,
Yeah,
so that's
he
okay.
is. Here's some color now in bloom to get you in the garden mood. This photo comes from Carrie in Duluth Hunters Park. She planted California giant zinnias from seed. They grew to over 2 feet high, and Carrie says They were a magnet for painted lady butterflies. Isn't that nice? That's a beautiful shot of one. Additional bonus, the deer left them alone. So.
That's right. Yeah, and another gardener from the Hunters Park area.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
Hotbed.
they point out there, if you really want to do it inexpensively, zinnias seed out pretty well, so do all the marigolds.
Yeah.
Now, we don't want to offend any of our sponsors who are selling your bedding plants, but you can have a little bit of both.
Yes.
For the early season blooms, some of the transplants, for some
Exactly.
of the later material, something that's direct seeded.
We were friends till just then.
I know. I didn't want to say, but move on to questions. So this is from, I wanted to ask this one first. Kelly in Calumet says her rhododendron froze over the winter. How can I protect it in the future?
Well, it's probably natural for it to freeze
Okay.
if they're outside or look relatively frozen. She'll want to wait to see what happens this spring as far as the buds, if it's going to leaf out, before she worries too much about it. In the future, though, if it did die out, make sure when she's looking for rhododendrons to look for truly hardy ones for that region. So she'll want to look for something zone 3. If it's protected, maybe zone 4 and take a chance. So.
You know, Tom, I was going to say, you know, we all froze over this winter.
Yeah, we did.
We've come back.
We do
And
come
better.
back. Leroy from Saginaw says, my potatoes look fine when I harvest, but they are black in the middle. Is it true blight? And if so, how do I prevent it this year?
It's probably not the early blight that people get concerned about. There are literally 100 fungal tuber
Wow.
diseases. The best thing he wants to do is he wants to start with a certified disease-free, what we call blue tag, white tag, or yellow tag seed potatoes. And actually, in my opinion, it's even more important to have a certified disease-free potato tuber than it is necessarily an organically grown tuber, because you can grow it out organically, but you don't want any disease in that tuber. So ask your vendor.
Here's a similar question, or follows along those lines, because Keith in Ashland has potatoes in cold storage from the garden from last year and is wondering about the best way to replant them. Should the sprouts be broken off or left intact?
Ooh, that's a good point. He wants to keep them cooler, because we're really about a month away before most of us are going to be planting potatoes. He doesn't want them to sprout. If any of them do sprout, you want to carefully put those sprouts in the ground. But he probably, I would say about May 1st, he wants to move them to maybe room temperature conditions to encourage some sprouting, and then plant about mid-May to avoid the risk of them being out of the ground if we got a late frost. So
Okay.
leave the sprouts on and then keep them as cool as you can.
Tom Duluth from Marie from Duluth. Let's say that right. She has 2 yucca plants and wants to know, will they come back?
Depending on the variety that they are, the rattlesnake master is really the variety that does the best in our environment. So depending on the variety, some of them will also act as an evergreen and keep that green foliage throughout the winter. But I wouldn't be too discouraged. We had kind of a rough winter, still parts of it going on. So wait and see what happens as far as it leafing out this spring. So.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on, because we want to take some time now to look at more garden green and color from last season. We head into Northwest Wisconsin for this week's Growin' Show. Washburn, Wisconsin's Don and Nancy Larson say they're anxious for the coming garden season and the return of favorite blooms like these white peonies. The Larsons like to encircle their deck with bright-colored annuals. Last year's clematis made a splash along the walkway. A well-placed fairy garden sits not far from a sunny yellow lily. Later season, the green and red colors contrast beautifully in these beds with russet foliage in the mix. And the rudbeckia happily spread across both sides of the yard, with plenty of room for playthings in between. If you have pictures of happy flowers and fine foliage, or any garden fare you'd like to share, send your best quality images to greatgardening@wdse.org. Pictures coming in, we really appreciate them, and so do all our viewers. They love to see them. Okay, we have a few more questions we hope to get to. Judy from Duluth, what can I do to prevent rabbits from chewing on the canes of my beautiful shrub roses?
Certainly a challenge. The good thing about if it does happen, and it just happens from year to year, depending on if there's rabbits in the area. The great thing about that is you can cut down beyond that, the damage, and that shrub row should come back for you just fine. So.
And encourage every red fox that you see. I saw one. I saw a roadkill, and there were literally tears in my eyes. Not so much for the fox, but the fact they keep our rabbit population in check.
Sure. Here's another one. How can I keep chipmunks from eating my lilies? That's Pat in Duluth, and she also wants to know, she or he also wants to know, can I cut my lilies down now? Or my lilacs, I'm sorry, my lilacs down.
Well, if they cut their lilacs, they're going to lose this year's blossoms. So if they want to do trimming and they can wait, do it after they're done blooming and in full leaf. As far as chipmunks, again, trying things like bone meal or blood meal has worked for me and has helped discourage them. But certainly they're something that all of us have to deal with. So.
All right. Lorene from Iron River, or Lorena, says, what can she do to prevent her rhubarb plant from going to seed too early?
You know, they're going to jump to seed, and as soon as that seed head begins to form, you just want to cut it off.
Okay.
And you'll actually see it begin to emerge down in the whorl of the plant, and get out there with a knife and take it off. It's a non-productive portion of the plant and just detracts from the actual productivity. Just keep cutting.
Okay, one more from Dean from Duluth. My Walla Walla onions don't get big. They do have full sun and fertilizer. What am I doing wrong?
Walla Walla is a good variety. It's a long day, so it should bulb up nicely for them. I would say if you can get good transplants, start early. I would say the first week in May. Make sure that bulbing does require quite a bit of potassium, which we tend to be deficient in our soil. So soil test, make sure you've got potassium. Nice uniform water through the entire season. So planting early, quality transplant, and plenty of potassium and uniform water. Do all that, and they should bulb up.
And lots of sun.
All right.
Full sun, good drainage, yes.
Great answers. Thanks for all the questions. Sorry we didn't get to them all, but we'll hang on to them. Let's remind folks quickly about the event coming up this Saturday, the Spring Garden Extravaganza. You guys are both going to be there Saturday at the Copper Top Church, and it should be a great event. Lots going on. Also want to tell people there's still tickets for our Spring Garden Bus Tour to Bayfield and Madeline Island. And go to our website for updates. You can also find more on our Facebook page. We have some postings there as well. Thanks to the phone volunteers. Thanks to you guys, as always. Great information, and we so appreciate you coming here and providing that. And to all of you who called in with questions, to all of you out there watching, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week on Great Gardening.